Chapter 1 of Book 3 of Metaphysics by Aristotle. There is a certain science which makes, as the object of its speculation, entity, as far forth as it is entity, and the things which are essentially inherent in this. But this is the same with none of those which are called particular sciences. For none of the rest of the sciences examines universally concerning entity so far forth as it is entity, but, cutting away a certain portion of it, they investigate what is accidental in regard of this, as, for example, the mathematical sciences. But whereas we are in search of first principles and the topmost causes, it is evident that they must needs be absolutely of a certain nature. If, therefore, they also who investigate the elements of entities were accustomed to investigate these first principles, it is necessary, likewise, that the elements of entity should not have a subsistence according to accident, but so far forth as they are entities. Wherefore also must we ascertain the first causes of entity, so far as it is entity. Chapter 2. Now, entity is spoken of in various senses indeed, but in reference to one, and to one certain nature, and not equivocally, but in like manner also, as everything conducive to health is termed so in reference to health, partly indeed in its preserving that state, and partly in giving rise to it, and partly in being an indication of health, and partly in being receptive of it. And in like manner as the medicinal is styled so in reference to the art of medicine, for indeed a thing is called medicinal partly in reference to its possessing the medicinal power, partly in its being by nature adapted for the possession of such, and partly in its being the work of the medicinal art. And we shall receive the predication of other things in a similar manner with these. Thus, however, is entity also spoken of in various ways indeed, but every entity in reference to one first cause. For some things, because they are substances, are styled entities, but others because they are affections of substance, but others because they are a way to substance, either as corruptions, or privations, or qualities, or things formative or generative of substance, or of those which are spoken of in reference to substance, or the negations of any of these, or of substance. Wherefore also the non-entity we pronounce to be non-entity. As then there is one science of all things pertaining to health, in like manner also is this so in the case of other things. For it is the province of one science to speculate concerning not only those things spoken of according to one, but also those spoken of in reference to a single nature. For these also, in a certain manner, are spoken of in accordance with one. It is evident, therefore, that it is the province of a single science to speculate concerning entities, so far forth as they are entities. But in every respect is the science of ontology strictly a science of that which is first or elemental, both on which the other things depend, and through which they are denominated. If then this is substance, the philosopher or metaphysician must needs be in possession of the first principles and causes of substances. Now, of every genus there is both one sense of each, and one science, as, for instance, grammatical science is one, and speculates into all vocal sounds. Wherefore, to speculate into also the number of the species of entity, and the species of the species, belongs to a science one in kind. If, therefore, entity and unity are the same thing, and one nature, from the fact of their following each other as first principle and cause, yet they are not manifested by a single definition. There is, however, no difference should we even make our suppositions in regard of them after a similar manner. Nay, Even rather is it for the advantage of the present inquiry, for it is the same thing, one man and the entity man and man, and not anything different does it make manifest, according to a repetition of the expression, to say man is, and one man. But it is evident that there is no separation of being either in the case of production or corruption, but in like manner also is it the case with unity. Wherefore it is manifest that addition in these implies the same thing, and that nothing different is unity from entity. And further, the substance of each thing is one not according to accident, and in like manner also is it the case with any entity whatsoever. Therefore, as numerous as are the species of unity, so numerous also are those of entity, into the nature of which it is the province of the same science in kind to investigate. Now, I speak, for instance, of sameness and similarity, and of the other things of this sort, and of those that are in opposition to these, and almost all contraries are reduced to this first principle. These points, however, have formed the subject matter of our inquiries in our treatise styled, A Selection of Contraries. And so many portions of philosophy are there as there are, at least, substances. Wherefore is it necessary that there should be a certain first philosophy, and one next in order belonging to these. For unity and entity are things straightway involving genera, wherefore also the sciences will follow upon these. For the philosopher or metaphysician is as one that is styled a mathematician, for his science also has parts, and there is a certain first and second science, and another next in order in mathematics. But whereas it is the province of one science to investigate things that are in opposition, and since plurality is opposed to unity, it is also the province of one science to speculate into negation and privation, on account of both kinds of inquiry being possible in the case of unity, of which there is the negation or the privation, either absolutely affirmed that such does not reside therein, or in a certain genus thereof. In this case indeed, therefore, the difference is present in unity, with the exception of that which is inherent in negation, for negation is the absence of that, and in privation also is there a certain subject nature of which the privation is predicated. Now, plurality is opposed to unity, wherefore also the things that are in opposition to those that have been mentioned, namely both diversity and dissimilarity and inequality, and as many other qualities as are denominated either according to the same or according to plurality and unity, it is the province of the science of metaphysics that we have alluded to examine into, among the number of which also a certain one is contrariety. For contrariety is a certain difference, but difference is diversity. Wherefore, since unity is spoken of in various ways, these also shall in many ways be spoken of. But nevertheless it is the province of one science to make known all such, for even though unity be spoken of in many ways, on that account it is not the province of a different science to investigate them. If, however, neither the definitions are capable of being reduced in accordance with one, nor in reference to one, then is it the province of a different science. But since all such are referred to what is first, as, for example, as many things as are styled one are spoken of in reference to the first one, in the same manner may the assertion be made that this science is concerning sameness and diversity and the rest of the contraries. Wherefore, in dividing how many modes each is expressed by, in this way must reference be made to what is first or original in each category, in order to ascertain how it is expressed in reference to that. For things will be denominated partly by reason of having those primaries, and partly that they are causes of them, and partly according to other such modes. Therefore is it evident, as has been stated in the doubts, that it is the province of one science to institute an inquiry concerning these, and concerning substance, but this was one of those inquiries that have been mentioned in the doubts. And it is the part of the philosopher to be able to speculate about all the foregoing subjects of inquiry. For if it be not the province of the philosopher, who shall there be that will be likely to examine whether he be the same person, Socrates, and Socrates sitting, or whether one be contrary to one, or what a contrary is, or in how many ways it is denominated? In like manner also is it in the case of the rest of such points for investigation. Since, therefore, these of themselves are affections of unity, so far forth as it is unity, and of entity, so far forth as it is entity, but not so far forth as they are numbers, or lines, or fire, it is evident that it is the province of that science of ontology to make known both what these are, and the accidents that are inherent in them, and not in this respect do they err who examine concerning these, as not philosophizing, but because substance, about which they understand nothing, is a thing prior in existence. Since, as there are peculiar affections of number as far as it is number, for instance, oddness, evenness, commensurability, equality, excess, defect, and as these both absolutely and relatively to one another are inherent in numbers, and since in a similar way there are other peculiar qualities in what is solid and incapable of motion, and in what is being moved, both that which is without weight, and that which has weight, so also in entity, so far forth as it is entity, are there certain peculiar properties, and these are they about the truth of which it is the province of the philosopher or ontologist to inquire. Now, a proof of this is the following. For dialecticians and sophists assume, indeed, the same figure as the philosopher. For sophistical is only apparent wisdom, and dialecticians dispute about all things. To all, however, is entity common. But they dispute concerning these evidently from the cause of these being proper subjects of inquiry for philosophy. For indeed, sophistry and dialectics are employed about the same genus as philosophy is, but philosophy differs from the one in the mode of power, and from the other in the choice of life, and again, dialectic science is merely tentative of the knowledge of those things that philosophy has already actually reached, but sophistic science is only apparent and not real. And the same is further proved from the fact that a different coordination of contraries is privation, and all things are referred to entity and nonentity, and to unity and plurality. As, for instance, rest in its nature partakes of unity, and motion of plurality, but that entities and substance are compounded of contraries, almost all men acknowledge. All, at least, assert the first principles to be contraries. According to some, indeed, these principles being odd and even, and according to others, hot and cold, and according to others, finite and infinite, and others, harmony and discord. But all the rest of such are referred apparently to unity and plurality. For let this reduction be received by us as is done in the first book of our work, concerning the good. Now, there it appears that first principles, both altogether and as is acknowledged by others, fall under these genera. From these statements, therefore, is it also evident that to investigate entity, so far forth as it is entity, is the province of one science. For all things are either contraries or composed from contraries. But the first principles also of contraries are unity and plurality, and these are belonging to the department of one science, whether the predication be made according to one or not, as perhaps the truth is. But, nevertheless, even though unity be spoken of in many ways, to the first will the rest be reduced, and the contraries in like manner. And for this reason, even though entity and unity be not universal and the same, in the case of all things, or separable as perhaps they are not, yet some things, no doubt, are referred to unity, but others to that next in order, and for this reason it is not the business of the geometer to investigate into what the contrary is, or the perfect, or unity, or entity, or identity, or diversity, save only from hypothesis. That, therefore, it is the province of one science to investigate entity, so far forth as it is entity, and the things therein existing, so far forth as they constitute entity, is evident, and that the same science is speculative not only of substances, but also of things that are inherent in substances, and of the particulars enumerated both concerning priority and subsequence, and genus and species, and whole and part, and the rest of each. This is evident also. Chapter 3. But we must determine whether it is the province of one science, or a different one, to speculate concerning axioms, as they are called in mathematics, and concerning substance. Doubtless, it is manifest that it is belonging to one, and that the science of the philosopher and the investigation of such inquirer is respecting these. For in all entities are they inherent, but not in any genus separate distinctly from the rest, and all investigators employ them, indeed, because they belong to entity, so far forth as it is entity. Each genus, however, constitutes entity. And thus far do they employ them as is sufficient for their purpose. But that is as far as they comprise the genus about which they bring forward their demonstrations. Wherefore, since it is evident that they are inherent in all things, as far as they are entities, for this is held by these in common, the speculation of them belongs to the philosopher, whose business it is to make known the truth concerning entity, so far forth as it is entity, and concerning these. Therefore, no one of those who are partial inquirers attempts to say aught concerning these, whether they are true or not, neither, for instance, the geometer nor the arithmetician. Some of the natural philosophers, however, in doing so, act reasonably, for they alone are accustomed to think that it is their province to examine concerning the whole of nature and concerning entity. But since there is something of a higher order than the physical, for nature is merely one certain genus of entity, the investigation in regard of these should belong to the universal, and to that which is speculative of the first substance. Now, I admit there is a certain wisdom, namely, even the physical, but it is not the first. As many things, however, as certain of those who speak concerning the truth of axioms attempt to lay down, in what way they ought to be admitted, they do this from ignorance of analytics. For they ought to approach such a subject who are instructed therein beforehand. But, whilst hearers, they should not be investigators. That, therefore, it is the part of the philosopher and of the inquirer concerning substance in its entirety, so far forth as it is such by nature to examine also in regard of syllogistic principles, is evident. But it is becoming that one especially furnishing information about each genus should be competent to speak of the very surest principles of the thing. And therefore the same holds true of a person that is engaged in the investigation of entities, so far forth as they are entities. I mean that he should be able to adduce the most firm principles of all. Now this is the philosopher, and the most firm first principle of all is that concerning which there can be no possibility of deception. For such must needs be that which is most known. For those points respecting which men do not impart knowledge are all exposed to deception in, and it must needs likewise be a thing independent of hypothesis. For a principle which one must be in possession of who understands any entity whatsoever, this is not an hypothesis, but what one must make known in the manifestation of anything whatsoever, he must also needs come forward furnished with this. That therefore, indeed, such is the most firm first principle of all is evident. Now, what this principle is we shall after this declare. For the same thing to be present and not be present at the same time in the same subject, and according to the same, is impossible. And whatsoever things we have further defined, let these be so defined in respect of their logical difficulties. This, however, is the most firm of all first principles, for it involves the distinction spoken of above. For it is impossible to suppose that anything whatsoever is the same, and is not the same, as certain think that Heraclitus asserts. For it is not necessary, as far as concerns what one asserts to exist, to suppose that these also do exist. But if it is not admissible that contraries at the same time should subsist in the same subject, now the usual definitions have been additionally made by us to this proposition. And if an opinion contrary to an opinion be that of contradiction, it is evident that it is impossible for the same inquirer to suppose that at the same time the same thing should be and not be, for one labouring under deception in regard of this would entertain contrary opinions at the same time. Wherefore, all who employ demonstration reduce the matter to this last opinion. For by nature this also is the first principle of all the rest of the axioms. End of chapter 3. Chapter 4. Now, there are certain philosophers who, as we have intimated, themselves both affirm that it is possible that the same thing may and may not be, and that they really think so. This principle, however, do many of the investigators of nature employ. But we just now have assumed it as a thing impossible in the case of an entity that it should be and not be at the same time, and by means of this have we demonstrated that this is the most firm of all principles. Now, some also demand a demonstration of this from ignorance. For it is ignorance the not knowing what things one ought to seek a demonstration of, and of what things he ought not. For indeed, upon the whole, it is impossible that there should be a demonstration of all things, for one would go on in this case to infinity, so that there would not be any demonstration at all in this way. If, however, there be some things of which we should not seek a demonstration, what they in preference require such a first principle to be, they have not the ability to affirm. But it is possible to demonstrate concerning this by refutation, that it is impossible if only he would affirm anything who doubts. But if he makes no assertion, it would be ridiculous, the seeking an argument against him who had not a reason to put forward about anything, so far as he had no such reason. For an adversary of this sort, as far now as he is such, would be like unto a plant. Now, I say, demonstration by refutation differs from demonstration simply, or properly so called, because he that employs demonstration would seem to require what is the principle in the beginning, but on the supposition of the existence of another cause of such a kind, it would be a refutation and not a demonstration. Now, a commencement of a discussion in regard of all such points is not the demanding the declaration that either a thing exists or doth not exist. For this, one would imagine, perhaps, was the asking the principle assumed originally, but the demanding the signification, at least, of a thing, both as for oneself and for another. For this also amounts to a necessity if he is to say anything at all, for if he does not, there would be no possibility of a rational discussion with such a one, neither for himself relatively to himself, nor to another. If any one, however, would grant this, there will be a demonstration in existence, for now will there actually be in existence something that has been determined. But the cause is not the person demonstrating, but the person sustaining the argument. For by overturning the discussion, he yet sustains the discussion, and further, he that acquiesces in this hath acquiesced in the truth of something independent of demonstration, so that not everything would be so and not so. In the first place, indeed, therefore, it is evident that this very assertion is true, because the name signifies the existence or the non-existence of this particular thing, so that not everything would be so and not so in this particular way. Further, if man signifies one thing, let this be a two-footed animal. Now I say that this signifies one thing, if this be man. Whatever is a man, this, namely, the being a two-footed animal, is the being in man. But there is no difference should any one assert that more is thereby signified, provided only they have been reduced under proper definitions. For grant that upon each definition a different name may have been imposed. Now I say, for example, if he would not assert that man signifies one, but many things, of one of which there is a single definition, namely, two-footed animal, yet also are there many others, but defined according to number, for its own proper denomination might be set down according to each of the definitions. But if its proper denomination should not be thus set down, but one would say that such signified an infinity of things, it is palpable that there would not be a definition of it at all. For the signifying not any one thing is the signifying nothing, and when the denominations are devoid of meaning, there is an end to mutual discussion, and also in reality to discussion on the part of a man with himself. For it is not possible that a person should understand anything that is not capable of understanding one thing. But if it were possible, one name would be imposed on this thing. Let it doubtless be granted, as has been stated in the commencement, that a name significant of something be significant of one thing also. It is not therefore possible that being in man signifies the same particular thing as the not being in man, if man is significant not merely of what is predicated of one, but even one thing itself. For this we do not require, that the one should signify that which is predicated of one. Since if the case stands in this way, at least, the musical, and the white, and the man would signify one thing, so that all things would be one, for they would be synonymous, and it will not be possible that the same thing be and not be, save by equivocation, just as if we would call any one a man whom others would call a not man. The subject of doubt, however, is not this, if it is possible that the same thing at the same time should be and not be the man nominally, but really. But if the name man and the name not man do not signify anything different, it is evident that the not being man will not differ from the being man, wherefore the being man will be the not being man. For they will be one thing. For this signifies that they are one, as a tunic and a cloak, if there is one definition of each. And if they shall be one, the being man and the not being man signify one thing, but it has been demonstrated that they signify a different thing. There is a necessity, therefore, of this consequence, if there be a particle of truth in the assertion, that man in signification is equipollent with the being a two-footed animal, for this was what the expression man was assumed to signify. Now, if there exists a necessity that this be the case, it is not possible for this very thing not to be a two-footed animal then, for this doth the phrase, quote, the being a necessity, close quote, signify, namely, the impossibility of its not being man. Accordingly, it is not possible to be true to say at the same time that the same thing is both a man and is not a man. But there prevails the same mode of reasoning in the case of the not being man also. For the being of a man and the not being of a man signify a different thing, if, truly, both the being white and the being man are different. For much more is their opposition in this case to justify the difference of signification. But if, also, one would say that the white signifies one and the same thing with the being man, again will we make the same assertion as has been declared on a former occasion, namely, that all things will be one, and not merely things in opposition. But if this be not possible, that which has been declared will happen, if the question asked be answered. If, however, when a simple question is put, one subjoin negations also, the question actually put is not replied to, for nothing hinders the same thing being both man and white, and other things 10,000 in multitude. But, nevertheless, if the question be asked, if it is true to affirm man to be this, or not to be so, the reply should be that it signifies one thing, and no addition should be made that it is both white and large. For also it is impossible to go through accidents when, at least, they are infinite. Either, therefore, let one go through all or none. In like manner, therefore, if also 10,000 times over they are the same thing, namely, man and not man, the reply to the question if man is, should not be that at the same time also not man is, unless the reply likewise states, in addition, the rest of whatsoever things are accidents, as many as are so, and as many as are not. If this, however, be not done by the person asked the question, there is nothing under discussion at all. But in general, they who make this assertion overturn substance and essence, or the formal cause and very nature of a thing. For they must themselves needs affirm all things to be accidents, and that the essence of man or animal, whatsoever it be, has no existence. For if there will exist the essential nature of anything whatsoever, such as is that which is to be man, this will not be to be not man, or not to be man, although these are negations of this. For it was one thing which it signified, and this was the substance of a certain thing. But the signification of the substance of a thing is, that not anything else is the being of that thing. But if the being whatsoever man is will be found in this, being either whatsoever is not man, or whatsoever not is man, is a thing impossible, for it will be a something different. Wherefore it will be necessary for them to say that a formal and substantial definition of this kind, and one invariably suited unto the subject, will be one of a nonentity. But all things, as we have supposed, are according to accident. For in this lies the distinction between substance and accident. For the white is an accident in man, because he is white, but not anything whatsoever that is white. But if all things are spoken of according to accident, there will be no primary universal, if an accident always signifies a predication about a certain subject. There is a necessity, then, of going on in a progression to infinity, but this is impossible, for more than two of such are not connected together. For accident is not a thing that is accidental to that which is an accident, unless that both are accidental in the same subject. Now, I say this, for example, in the instance of the white being musical, and the latter being white, because both are accidents in man, but not on this account is Socrates musical, because it happens that both are accidents in a certain other subject. Since accidents, therefore, are spoken of some in this way and some in that, as many as are so expressed, as the white in Socrates, it is not possible should be infinite in an ascending series of productions in the case of man, as, for example, that in Socrates, the white, there should be some other different accident, for any one thing is not produced from all. Nor truly in the white will be found any different accident, as, for instance, the musical, For also in no wise rather is this an accident in that, than that in this. And at the same time the distinction has been made that some things are accidents after this manner, but others as the musical in Socrates. But as to as many things as are accidental in this way, such are accidents not in such a way as an accident in what is accidental, but this is the case with whatsoever is accidental in that other way. Wherefore all things will not be spoken of according to accident. Something then will there be significant also as of substance, and if this be so, it has been demonstrated that it is impossible that at the same time contradictions should be predicated of the same subject. Further, if all contradictions are true at the same time concerning the same thing, it is manifest that all things will be one. For the same thing will it be both a trireme, and a wall, and a man, if it is possible to affirm or deny anything of everything, as there is a necessity for those to do who assert the opinion of Protagoras. For if also to any one a man seems not to be a trireme, it is evident that he will not be a trireme. Wherefore also he is, if the contradiction be true. And doubtless comes to pass a saying of Anaxagoras, at the same time subsist together all things, so that in reality nothing is one. The indefinite, therefore, they seem to speak of, and thinking that they mention entity, they talk about nonentity. For an entity in capacity, and not in actuality, constitutes the indefinite. But doubtless must we say to the authors of this hypothesis, that of everything either an affirmation or a negation must be predicated, for it would be absurd if in each thing there will be inherent the negation of itself, but that the negation of what is different, and which is not inherent therein, will have no existence. Now I say, for example, if it is true to assert of a man that he is not a man, it is manifest also that he is not a trireme. If indeed, therefore, there is truth in the affirmation, there is a necessity that also there be truth in the negation. But if there is not truth in the affirmation, the negation at least of a trireme will more appertain to him than the negation of himself. If, therefore, that also be true, there will also be truth in the negation of the trireme, and if in the negation of this, in the affirmation also. And these consequences happen to those who make such a statement, even to the effect that it is not necessary to employ either affirmation or negation. For if it is true that the same individual is man and not man, it is evident that such a one will be neither man nor not man. For of those two qualities there are two negations. But if that is one which is composed of both, this one would also be in opposition. Further, indeed, respecting all things it is so, and a thing will be white and not white, and entity and nonentity, and it will be so respecting the rest of the assertions and negations in a similar manner. Or this will not be the case, but only so regarding some, and not regarding others. And if, doubtless, it were not so respecting all, these would be indisputable. But if it be true concerning all, again, no doubt, in the case of whatsoever there is an assertion, there will also be a negation, and in the case of whatsoever there is a negation, there will likewise be an assertion. Or in the case of whatsoever there is an assertion, there will also be a negation. Or of whatsoever indeed there is an assertion, there is also a negation. But of whatsoever things there is a negation, of all such there will not be an assertion. And if this be so, there would be something indubitably a nonentity, and this will be a firm opinion. And if to be a nonentity be something both firm and known, more firm would be the opposite assertion. And if in like manner also it is necessary that in the case of whatsoever things one employs a negation, he should employ an affirmation also, it would be true undoubtedly by dividing to say either that a thing, for instance, is white, and again that it is not white, or that this would not be true. And if indeed it is not true, by dividing, to say so, he does not affirm these things, and there is nothing in existence. But how can one speak of non-entities, or understand anything respecting them, or thus move forward in the paths of knowledge? And all things would be one, as it has been said heretofore, and both man and God and trireme and the contradictions of them will be the same. But if in like manner this be so in the case of each thing, in no wise will one thing differ from another. For if there will be a difference, this will be true, and a peculiarity of this. In like manner also, if it is possible that he who makes the division should speak the truth, there happens that which has been declared. And to this reason we may subjoin the following, that all would speak the truth, and all would speak falsely, and one would acknowledge himself to be speaking what is false. At the same time, however, it is evident that the investigation with such a person is concerning nothing, for he affirms nothing, for neither in this manner nor in that is the assertion made with such a one, but in this manner and not in this manner. And again, at least, with respect to these points, he makes a negation of both, because the assertion is made that they are neither so in this manner, nor not in this manner, but both in this manner, and not in this manner. For if this were not the case, there would now be in existence something that has been defined. Further, if when an assertion be true, the negation be false, and if when the latter itself be true, the affirmation be false, it would not be possible at the same time to assert and deny the same thing with truth. But perhaps persons will say that this is what has been laid down from the commencement. Further, does one who supposes that in a manner a thing either is so and so, or that it is not so, labour under a misapprehension? But he who thinks that it is both, does he speak truth, or can he verify his assertion? For if he affirms truth, what is the assertion, save that such is the nature of entities? And if he does not affirm the truth, but rather he speaks truth, who makes a supposition in that way, entities in such a case would in a certain manner be now disposed thus. And would this be true, and not so at the same time, and yet in reality not true? But if in like manner all both speak falsehood and speak truth, it is not possible for such either to utter or to declare anything, for at the same time he says the same things and not the same things. But if he makes no supposition, but in the same way thinks and does not think, in what way will he be disposed differently from plants? Whence also it is especially manifest that no one either of the rest of the sceptics, or of those making this statement, is so affected. For why, may I ask, does he walk towards Megara, but not remain still, thinking that he is actually walking? Nor straightway at dawn does he proceed to a well, or a precipice, if he may chance to meet with such. He, however, appears cautious, as not considering the falling into it to be not good, and to be good in the same sense. It is evident, accordingly, that the one he considers preferable, but the other as not preferable. And, if this be the case, both the one he must needs consider a man, and the other not a man, and the one thing sweet, and the other not sweet. For not as of equal importance doth he investigate and regard all things, inasmuch as he thinks it better to drink water and to visit a certain person, and then seeks in point of fact for those very things, although he ought to seek for all things with equal zest, if in like manner it were the same thing. I mean to say both man and not man. But, as has been declared, there is no one who does not appear cautious in regard of the one set of things, and not so in regard of the other. Wherefore, as it appears, all men suppose that the case is absolutely so, if not concerning all things at least, concerning what is better and worse. Now, if they do so not from scientific knowledge, but from opinion, much more must attention be paid to truth, just as also the health of one that is diseased must be looked after more than that of a person that is sound. For he that indulges in theory or surmise, compared with one possessed of scientific knowledge, is not healthfully disposed towards truth. Further, although as much as possible all things should especially be so and not so, yet at any rate the more and the less are inherent in the nature of entities. For one would not say that 2 and 3 were similarly even, nor does a person in the same manner assert an untruth who thinks 4 5, as he who thinks it 1,000. If, therefore, he be not deceived, in the same manner it is evident that the other is less deceived in this way, so that he affirms what is more true. If, therefore, that which is more true be more immediate to the truth, there would be something true at least, to which what is more contiguous will be more true. And even if nothing should be true, yet now at any rate is there something that is more firm and more true than another, and so in this way would we be liberated from that intemperate theory alluded to, and one which forbids the definition of anything mentally. End of chapter 4. Chapter 5. Now, from the same opinion originates also the theory of Protagoras, and in like manner is there a necessity that both of them should be or not be capable of verification. For if all things that seem so are true, and if all things that are apparent are true, then must all things at the same time be true and false. For many entertain contrary opinions to one another, and those who do not happen to think the same with themselves they regard as victims to delusion, so that the same thing must needs be and not be. And if this be the case, it is necessary that all things that seem so should be true, for opposite sentiments do they hold with one another who speak falsehood and who speak truth. If then things be so, all will speak truth. That from the same opinion then both of these theories originate is evident. There does not, however, exist the same method of conducting our controversy as regards all such philosophers. For some of them require persuasion, and some compulsion. For as many indeed as have formed opinions in this way from doubt, the ignorance of these is remediable, for the refutation is directed towards not the theory, but the understanding, and as many as speak for argument's sake, refutation is a cure also of these, both of that discourse which consists in voice, and of that which consists in names. But unto those persons who labour under doubt in this way has the opinion itself originated from sensibles. The opinion, I mean, that contradictions and things contrary subsist together, inasmuch as they see contraries arising from the same thing. If, therefore, it is not possible that nonentity should come into existence, in a similar way, according to them, must the thing have pre-existed, namely, as both contraries at once, as also Anaxagoras says, and Democritus, that everything was mingled in everything. For also this latter philosopher maintained that vacuity and fullness are similarly resident in any part whatsoever, although the one of these is entity, and the other nonentity. Respecting indeed, therefore, those who form their opinions from these data, we will say that in a certain manner they speak correctly, and that in a certain sense they are involved in ignorance. For entity is spoken of in a twofold point of view, so that it is in a way admissible that something should arise from that which has no being, and that it is in a way not admissible that it should be so, and that the same thing at the same time should be an entity and a nonentity, but not according to the same entity. For in capacity, no doubt, is it admissible at the same time for the same thing to be contraries, but in actuality not so. And further, shall we deem them to suppose the existence of a certain other substance of entities, in which is inherent neither motion, nor corruption, nor generation at all? And in like manner also has the truth respecting the things apparent reached some speculators from sensibles, for they do not consider it fitting that the true should be decided by plurality or fewness. But the same thing seems sweet to some on tasting it, and to others bitter. Wherefore, if all persons were sick, or all beside themselves, but 2 or 3 were sound in health, or in possession of their mind, it would happen that these latter would appear to be ill, and labouring under an aberration of intellect, but that the rest would not seem so. Further, to many of the rest of the animal creation do contraries appear to be the same thing as well as to us, and to each very person with himself things do not always, according to sense, appear to be the same. Which description of these, therefore, is true, or false, is obscure. For nothing the more is this true than that, but both in like manner are affected as regards truth. Wherefore Democritus says, at least, that, positively, either nothing is true, or that if it be so, that to us it is wrapped in obscurity. But, upon the whole, on account of their supposing prudence, no doubt to be sense, and that this sense constitutes an alteration, these persons affirm that the apparent, according to sense, is necessarily true. For from these sceptics, both Empedocles and Democritus, and each of the other philosophers, so to speak, have become entangled in opinions of this sort. For Empedocles also asserts that those changing their habit change their prudence. Witness his words, quote, for the present counsel varies in men, close quote. And in other passages he says that, quote, as far as diverse men become, so far is present also in them always diverse thought, close quote. And Parmenides evinces the same mode of thinking, for instance in the words, quote, for as each has a tempering of graceful limbs, so present in man is mind. For the same thing with whatever thinks is the nature of limbs in men, both every and all, for more than this is mind. Close quote. And the apothegm of Anaxagoras also is remembered amongst certain of his associates, namely, that entities are such to them as they may have supposed them. Now, they say that even Homer seems to have been in possession of this opinion, because he made Hector, after he was deranged from the wound, to lie in a delirious state, as if even those of unsound mind were capable of exercising thought, indeed, but not the same thoughts as with those of sound mind. It is evident, therefore, if both be exertions of prudence, that also entities subsist in this way, and not in this way, at the same time. Wherefore also most difficult is that which ensues from this theory, for if they, who particularly perceived as true that which it is admissible should be true, but these are they who especially seek after it and love it, if these persons hold such opinions, and manifest such tenets respecting truth, how is it not becoming those to despair who attempt to philosophize? For the pursuit of things eluding their grasp would constitute the investigation of truth. But a cause of this opinion of theirs is the following, that from time to time they have examined into the truth concerning entities no doubt, but the entities they have supposed to be sensibles merely. Now in these is inherent much of the nature of the indefinite, and that of entity which subsists in such a manner as we have declared. Wherefore they speak naturally, but they do not speak things that are true. For so is it more in harmony for them to speak after this manner than as Epicharmus in his reply to Xenophanes. But, moreover, seeing the whole of this visible nature in motion, but respecting what is being changed, seeing nothing verified, regarding at least what is being changed altogether and everywhere, they considered that verification was not a thing that is possible. For from this hypothesis blossomed that most extreme opinion of those philosophers mentioned just now, namely, that of those speculators who profess to adopt the philosophy of Heraclitus, and such as Cratylus held, who at last was of opinion that one ought to speak of nothing, but moved merely his finger, and who rebuked Heraclitus for saying that it is not possible to enter the same river twice, for he himself was of opinion that you could not do so once. In reply, however, to this theory, we will also say that there is some foundation in reason for their supposing with these that which undergoes a change, when it does change, may not be considered as existing. This, however, is a circumstance attended with doubtfulness, for the rejecting substance retains something of that which is rejected, and of that which is being produced must there now necessarily exist something, and if, in short, it is undergoing corruption, there will subsist a certain entity. And if it is being produced, there must needs be that from which it is produced, and by which it is generated, and that this process goes not on in a progression to infinity. Omitting, however, these arguments, let us make those assertions following, namely, that not the same thing is the alteration according to quantity and according to quality. Grant, indeed, that as far as quantity goes, it does not abide the same, but it is according to form that we know all things. But further, it is worth while reproving those who think thus, because although knowing the number of sensibles themselves, and that in the case of the fewer number of sensibles this state of flux and mutation was to be found, they have yet manifested similar sentiments respecting the whole heaven. For the place about us of what is sensible continues alone to subsist in a condition of corruption and generation. But this in no wise, so to say, is part of the universe. Wherefore, more justly would it be, on account of the greater number of witnesses, to have acquitted these, than on account of these, the fewer, to have condemned those. And further, it is evident that in reply also to these, we may use the same arguments with those that have been originally laid down by us. For that there is some nature immovable has been demonstrated to their satisfaction, and has gained their assent. It happens, however, to those at least who say that a thing is, and is not at the same time, to affirm all things to be in a state of rest, rather than of motion. For on this hypothesis there exists nothing into which anything is changed, for all things are inherent in all. Regarding, however, the truth that not everything that is apparent is true, in the first place, indeed, it might be replied that sense, to be sure, is not deceitful in what falls within its own peculiar province, but that imagination is not the same with sense. It is worthy of consideration and wonder, in the next place, if they really are in doubt of this, whether magnitudes are so great, and colours such as they appear to those at a distance, or such as they appear to those that are near, and whether they are such as they appear to persons in health, or such as they appear to persons in sickness, and in regard of weight, whether things more weighty are such as appear so to the weak, or such as seem so to the strong, and lastly, in respect of truth, whether things are true such as appear so to the sleeping, or such as seem so to those who are awake. For that they do not, in reality, think so, at least, is evident. For no one, if even he supposes when asleep by night that he were in Athens, when he is in Libya, goes when he awakes to the Odeon. And further, respecting the future, as also Plato says, doubtless, not similarly decisive is the opinion of the physician and that of the ignorant quack, for example, as to the likelihood that one will be sound, or that one will not be so. And further, in the case of the senses themselves, not similarly decisive is the testimony of sense in respect of what is foreign, and in respect of what is its peculiar province, or of that which is near, and of that which is remote from itself. But respecting colour, it is sight and not taste that judges, and respecting juices, it is taste but not sight, each of which never at the same time affirms about the same thing that simultaneously a thing is so and not so disposed. But neither in a different period have the senses doubted about the passion at least to which they are subject, but about that in which the passion is an accident. Now I say, for example, that the same wine, either from being changed, or from the bodily organ being changed, might so appear at one time to be sweet, and at another time not sweet. But the sweet then, at least, when it is sweet, is not such, for it never has undergone a change, but always verification thereof is possible, and of necessity is it that such will be a thing that is sweet. All these theories, however, overturn this conclusion, since, also, if there is not a substance of anything, neither is there anything necessarily subsisting. For it is not admissible for the necessary to be at one time disposed one way, and at another time another. Wherefore, if there is anything of necessity, it will not be disposed both so and not so. If also, upon the whole, what is sensible exists merely, nothing would there be subsisting, inasmuch as animated beings would have no existence, for sense would have no existence. Perhaps then, on the supposition of the non-existence of sense, the truth would be that neither sensibles nor sensations exist, for of the percipient is sense and affection, but that it is impossible that the subjects themselves which produce sense have not any existence, even though sense exist not. For, doubtless, sense itself is not of itself, but there is something else also, different from, and independent of, sense, which must needs be prior to sense. For the moving cause is prior in nature to that which is being moved. And if these assertions are made one with another, not a whit the less is the same theory true. Chapter 6. But there are some who doubt and are skeptics, both amongst those who are persuaded of the reality of these opinions, and those who merely affirm these theories. For they ask, who is it that judgeth him that is in good health, and him that, upon the whole, is capable of forming his decision correctly about each particular? Now, doubts of such a sort as this are similar to one's doubting whether we now sleep or are awake. For all such doubts are tantamount to the same. For these persons demand that there should be a reason of all things, for they seek for a first principle and expect to obtain this by demonstration, whereas, at least, that they are not persuaded of the validity of their position they make manifest in their acts. But, as we have said, this is the characteristic property of these philosophers, for they seek for a reason of things of which there is no reason. For the principle of demonstration is not demonstration. These, therefore, indeed, would be easily persuaded of this, for it is not difficult to apprehend. They, however, who seek in reason compulsion merely, seek an impossibility, for what is contrary they deem it right to speak, immediately uttering contrary things. But if all things are not relatives, but some are also themselves by themselves, that is, absolute, in such a case everything apparent would not be true, for the apparent is apparent to some one. Therefore, he that says that all things apparent are true, makes all entities relatives. Wherefore also must the precaution be adopted by those who seek for compulsion in reason, and at the same time also think right to subjoin a reason that not the apparent is true, but that the apparent is true to whomever it appears so, and when it appears, and how far, and in what manner. But if they subjoin a reason, to be sure, but do not in this way subjoin it, it will happen speedily unto them that they should speak things that are contrary. For it is possible for the same thing to appear honey as far as the sight goes, and not to appear so to the taste. And as we have two eyes, not the same will a thing appear to each organ of vision, if they be dissimilar. Whereas, in reply to those, at least, who, on account of the causes originally enumerated, affirm the apparent to be true, and for this reason contend that all things in like manner are false and true, in reply to these, I say, it may be affirmed that neither the same things appear the same to all men, nor to the same person do the same things invariably appear the same, but frequently things contrary at the same time. For the touch, in the alteration of the fingers, says that there are two objects, but the organ of sight, one. But neither to the same sense, at least, do the same things seem the same, and according to the same, and in like manner also in the same moment of time. Wherefore this would be true. But perhaps for this cause it is necessary to say to those who speak not on account of doubt, but for talk's sake, that this is not absolutely true, but that it is true relatively to this person. And as doubtless it has been formerly affirmed, it is necessary also to make all things relative, both in reference to opinion and sense, so that nothing either has been produced or will arise except on the supposition of some person previously exercising thought. But if anything has been generated or will arise, it is evident that all things would not be according to opinion. Further, if one thing exists, it exists in relation to one, or in relation to a definite thing, and if the same thing is both half and equal, such exists in relation to these. Yet the equal is not in reference to the double. Now, in relation to opinion, if man and the subject of the opinion be the same, man will not be the thinking subject, but the subject of opinion. But if each thing will be in relation to the thinking subject will subsist in relation to things infinite in species. That indeed, therefore, most indisputable of all is the opinion that assertions in opposition are not at the same time true, and what happens in the way of consequence unto those who say that they are true, and why they say so, let thus much suffice to have been spoken. But since it is impossible that contradiction should be true of the same subject at the same time, it is evident that neither can contraries possibly subsist at the same time in the same subject. For indeed of contraries one or other is not the less privation, but privation of substance is negation from some definite genus. If, therefore, it is impossible at the same time to affirm and deny with truth, it is impossible that also contraries should be inherent in the same subject at the same time, but either both must be inherent partially, or the one partially, and the other simply, or absolutely. Chapter 7. But, truly, neither is it possible that there is any mean between a contradiction, but there is a necessity either of asserting or denying any one thing whatsoever of one. Now, in the first place, this is evident to those who define what truth and falsehood are. For indeed, the assertion that entity does not exist, and that non-entity does, is a falsehood, but that entity exists, and that non-entity does not exist, is truth. Wherefore, the person who affirms that this medium is in existence, or is not, will speak truth or utter falsehood. But neither is entity nor non-entity said not to exist, or to exist. Further, either will there be a mean between contradiction, as that of a darkish colour between black and white, or it will be as that which is neutral between man and horse. If, therefore, this subsist in this way, there would be no change, for a change takes place from something that is not good into that which is good, or from this latter into what is not good. But now it is always apparent as taking place, for there is not a change existing, but one into opposites and media. If, however, there is a mean, so also would there be a certain production into a thing that is white, not from that which is not white, but this is not perceived as being the case. Further, everything intelligible and mental the understanding either affirms or denies, and this is manifest from definition when truth is spoken, or falsehood, when indeed in this way it is composed as an assertion or negation, truth is spoken, but when in that way, falsehood. Further, must there be in all contradictions a mean, save where the assertion is made only for argument, or talk's sake, so that also one will neither utter truth nor not utter truth, and besides entity and non-entity there will be something in subsistence. Wherefore, besides generation and corruption, some change will there be. Moreover, in whatsoever genera negation introduces the contrary, in these also will be found this medium, as for example, in numbers a number neither odd nor not odd. Such, however, is impossible, and from the definition is this evident. Further, would we go on in a progression to infinity, and not only will there be sesquialterate entities, but even more than this. For again, it will be possible to deny this in regard of the assertion and negation of the medium of the former contradiction. And this will be something, for there will be a certain other substance of this. Moreover, as to the question if a thing is white when one says that it is not, nothing has he denied than that it is, but that a thing is not amounts to a negation. But from the same source as other paradoxes has this opinion reached unto certain speculators. For when they are unable to solve arguments open to dispute, giving in to reason, they consent to the truth of whatever is brought out by syllogism. Some therefore make assertions from some such cause as this, but others on account of requiring in their investigations the reason of all things. The principle, however, in respect of all these is to be derived from definition, but definition arises from their necessarily signifying something, for the sentence of which the name is assigned becomes the definition of a thing, and the theory of Heraclitus, affirming all things to be and not to be, appeared to make all things true, but that of Anaxagoras was that there is a certain medium between contradiction, so that all things are false, for when they are mingled, neither is the mixture good nor not good, wherefore there is nothing that one can affirm as true. Chapter 8. Now, these distinctions having been laid down, it is evident that the predications made in one way only, and also those that are made about all, it is impossible should be as certain a firm they are. Some indeed saying that nothing is true, for nothing, they say, hinders all things from being in such a way as that the diagonal of a square is commensurable with its side, but others affirming that all things are true. For almost all these assertions are the same with those of Heraclitus. For this philosopher, in affirming that all things are true and all things false, affirms also, separately, each of these theories. Wherefore, if those are impossible, it is impossible likewise that these should be so. But further are those palpably contradictions which, likewise, it is not possible should at the same time be true. Nor, doubtless, is it possible that all should be false, although, at least, it would the rather seem to be admissible from what has been stated. But in reply to all such theories must the question be asked, as also has been declared in the discussions above, not if there is something, or if there is not, but if something has a signification. Wherefore, from the definition is the discussion to be drawn, by assuming what falsehood or truth signifies. But if the true and the false be nothing else than to assert what is true or deny what is false, it is impossible that all things be false, for it is necessary that either portion of the contradiction be true. Further, if it be necessary either to assert or deny everything, it is impossible for both to be false, for either part of the contradiction is false. Truly also doth the common saying happen unto all such theories, that they overthrow or stultify themselves. For the person that says that all things are true renders the statement contrary to this true also, wherefore he makes his own affirmation not true, for the contrary says that it is not true, but he that says that all things are false, even himself falsifies his own position. If, however, they make an exception, the one making an exception in the case of the contrary, that it is not alone true, and the other in the case of his own assertion, that it is not false, in no wise the less does it happen unto these skeptics that they require the truth and falsehood of an infinite number of assertions. For he who says that a true theory is true agrees with the affirmation that it is true, but this will go on in a progression infinity. It is evident, however, that neither they who lay down that all things are at rest speak the truth, nor they who say that all things are in motion. For if, indeed, all things are at rest, the same things will always be true and false. Now this appears to be a thing undergoing a change. For he who speaks once himself was not, and again will not be. If all things, however, are in motion, there will be nothing that is true. All things, in that case, are false. But it has been demonstrated that this is impossible. Further, must entity needs undergo a change, for from something into something is the change made. But doubtless neither are all things at rest or in motion at any particular time. But nothing subsists in such a condition of rest or motion eternally. For there is something which always moves the things that are in motion, and the first imparter of motion is itself immovable. End of chapter 8 and end of book 3.